Health is wealth. What does that mean? Well, without your health, you have nothing. And if you've ever been sick, you know that you don't care about anything else other than getting healthy. So while I like to focus on money and wealth and the freedom that brings, again, without the health, you have no freedom, you have no wealth. And so it's important to think about those things. We can think about the markets and how to make more money, but what does that mean to us if we're not healthy? And that's exactly the topic that we're going to have today. I'm joined by one of the top leading experts in natural health for the last 25 years. I'm talking about Dr. Joe Mercola. We're going to talk about a couple things to really help you be more wealthy with being more healthy. We're going to talk about several topics. I asked him to give us the top 3 things that can have the biggest impact on your health. We're going to talk about that. We talk about some things that were very surprising to me. His contrarian take on cardio versus resistance training. We talk about the stress that your body needs to go through. We talk about some of the fads in health that he thinks really aren't that important. We talk about, again, the top 3 things you need to do, and also some of the things that you need to stay away from. So things that you do, but also things that you don't do as well. We talk about that. And we talk about his new book coming out, the importance of what he's writing in there. We talk about brain fog and mental health and so many other topics. Again, health is wealth. It's great to think about money. Money gives us options. Money gives us freedom. But if we don't have the health, we have none of that. So let's go ahead and jump into this conversation with Dr. Joe Mercola. Now, I do want to say that Dr. Joe Mercola is going to be speaking at my live event coming up, marketdisruptorslive.com. There's a link down below. Come meet some new friends, see some of the top speakers in the world in their respective niches. I'm talking about Luke Grauman, George Gammon, Danielle DiMartino Booth, Robert Breedlove, of course, Dr. Joe Mercola, and so many more. Come meet them, shake their hand, ask them those burning questions you have personally, make some new friends. It's going to be a highlight of the year. I can say that confidently because last year was off the hook. MarketDisruptorsLive.com. There's a link down below. Let's go ahead and jump right into the interview with Dr. Joe Mercola. Dr. Joe Mercola, I'm so excited to have you back on the show again. I love talking to you. Welcome.
Well, thanks for having me.
Yeah. So, I put out a tweet a while ago, and I said that we should also look at freedom as an asset, because I talk about finance products, financial information. And I said we should look at freedom as an asset. And I also then I put out another tweet that seemed to go kind of viral, and I said we should also look at health as an asset. And I think, for a lot of people watching this channel, they, come to learn about finance or maybe politics and finance. They don't think about health, but without health, you really have nothing. And I think anybody who's ever been sick before realizes, like, as soon as I'm sick, I don't care about anything. I mean, it's that important.
So I couldn't agree more. If you have 9 digits in assets, what good is it going to do you if you don't have your health to enjoy? Health is the greatest wealth.
It's the greatest wealth. And, I know you've been on the forefront of this. I mean, in kind of more in like natural health for like 25 years. Give us kind of a background on what that means. Like, you've been working on natural health. You're a little bit different than most doctors out there.
Well, I've been passionate about health since the 60s.
Okay.
And when I first started exercising at that time, unfortunately, chose the wrong type of exercise, cardiovascular exercise, which was okay, but not as good as resistance training. And then I said, I was so passionate about health. I wanted to go to medical school to learn as much about health as I could. So, but I got brainwashed from medical school, because you see, most people don't understand that conventional medicine was essentially captured about 112 years ago. In 1910, there was the Flexner Report that was put out by Andrew Carnegie and John Rockefeller. And essentially, it took out natural medicine out of the medical school curriculum. Gone, vanished. And they replaced it with essentially oil-based chemicals, pharmaceuticals, primarily, because Rockefeller was his thing. I mean, he was the oil guy, right? So they took out natural medicine ideas of gone, abandoned. They closed down schools. It was a massive overhaul. If you look it up and you read about it, it's just crazy what they did. Eliminated homeopathy, naturopathy. They crushed it, absolutely crushed it. And it hasn't been the same since. It was a very effective strategy.
When they brought in oil-based products, to your point, what does that mean? So that's when like pharmaceuticals or pharmacology really took off.
most people don't understand that most drugs are derivatives. They're synthetic chemicals and derivatives of essentially oil.
Wow.
So yeah,
No,
oil
I don't
based.
think, I mean, I understand that they're synthetic, obviously, right? They're made in a lab, but I hadn't really thought about them being oil
Yeah, not all
derivatives.
drugs, of course. I mean, some
Sure.
are made by bacteria like insulin and others, but for the most part, they're derived from oil, petroleum.
Okay. So then there was this takeover of the medical system that pushed everything towards pharmacology or pharmaceuticals.
Mhm.
But some people like yourself have still kind of followed the like, more natural medicine route.
Well, I was always inclined to do that, but when I got brainwashed in medical school, I mean, I bought the conventional thinking hook, line, and sinker, and which is essentially to train you to become this diagnostic machine, so that a constellation of symptoms uh, is a diagnosis, and every diagnosis has an optimal or not optimal, but a recommended regimen, which usually consists of medications that virtually never, ever address the foundational cause of what caused that symptom or disease.
Right.
So, I bought into it for at least 5 or 6 years, and I finally woke up and recognized that this was not the case. And I gradually found that there was other physicians who had this feeling, and I would go to conferences every week or once or twice a month, and started learning natural medicine and applying it in my practice. So and I saw an unbelievable change in my patients. Rather than having to prescribe medications that just treated their symptoms and then eventually stopped working and they get worse. I finally had a solution for what was causing. So
Yeah, my sister is a doctor. She told a similar story. She got out of medical school and came home all fired up and told us all that forget your health, forget your immune system, forget all that, just take the pharmaceuticals. And she was fired up. And that's a paraphrasing what she told us. It took her a long time to be able to shed those scales and start to think for herself again. And just in the last 6-8 months, she was let go of her position at the hospital in California because she wouldn't go along with their policies. We'll say that.
you didn't take the jab?
Yeah, she wouldn't do that.
Oh
And
man, your sister is a smart woman. That
well,
was hard.
yeah, obviously we can't really dig deep into these topics on this channel, but she was working here at 29 Palms in Southern California, which is at the Marine base. I believe there's a Marine base there. And so she went through the Navy for her medical school. So they paid for her debt. That was a good thing. But then she was working at this hospital here, 29 Palms, which is at the edge of the Marine base. And even pre-pandemic, the majority of her week was filled up with injuries from jabs. Let's just call it that. Even before the pandemic, before this new system came out, and all week, that's all she sees is like injury. 18-year-old kids. She said their lives are just ruined. And I think that really started to open her eyes up to what was going on. And then, of course, the pandemic came, and then a whole new jab came from that. And so she didn't want anything to do with that. My point, though, was that she was then let go of the hospital, and she took a job in Texas at a functional medicine clinic. And she doesn't know anything about it, but they offered to teach her. And so it's almost like in order to see past this one, you have to get rid of your old way of thinking that's been so ingrained into you. All your peers, there's a lot of peer pressure in that as well. And then you have to go seek this on your own, I guess.
Typically, that's the case. But fortunately, medical school provides a very rigorous and academic training, and it gives you the basics and the parameters of which to apply this. So I think it really is the best discipline to go into to have that training as a foundation, and then acquire these other skills that so easily apply. Because literally in months to a year, you can become really adept and expert. I mean, probably 5 years, but you can really get good if you have a solid foundational training. So I'm so happy for your sister. Is she going to be at your event in Dallas?
She will be. Yeah.
Oh, good. I make sure I meet her.
Yeah, I will. And she's a big fan of yours. So I'll definitely put you guys together. She's living in Houston now, so it's a close drive getting over to Dallas.
Great.
So you said something before that that I thought was pretty interesting about exercising, and how you were exercising the wrong way. You were focused on cardiovascular, which seems to be everybody needs to put in their 30 minutes of cardio. That's wrong.
Excuse me. I believe so. And let me tell you how I got hooked into that. It was because in 1968, Ken Cooper, who was a physician, he was a lieutenant colonel with the Air Force, and he was responsible for writing the book Aerobics. You probably have heard of that book.
Sure.
He's responsible for coining that term. And he created these tables that you got so many points for, like running a mile in under 8 minutes or 12 minutes. And then you'd add up the points, and he had a whole system where you needed so many points a week to stay healthy, 15, 30 points. I can't remember what it was. So, if a typical American, if a little is good, then a lot more is going to be better. Right. So, and there was a lot of, in the 60s and 70s, there was a lot of literature out there that said, oh, if you run a marathon, you're virtually immune to heart disease. Well, exercise is good, and you should do ideally some cardio, but you can get almost all the required cardio you need from strength training. And really none of us would need exercise if we were engaging in the activities that our ancient ancestors did, because they had to work their butts off to get food and shelter. And they didn't need to go to the gym. They were doing the daily activities of living. That's not us, though. We all have desk jobs, essentially. But there's a few people who don't, and they don't need exercise. But if unless we're engaging in rigorous physical activity, you're going to have some of it. Really is crucial. It's sort of a fine point. It's not one of the most basic and essentials, but I really think if you want to enjoy your life and healthy and avoid frailty or sarcopenia as you get older, loss of muscle mass, it's 50, 60% of the people over 50 years old have decreased muscle mass. And your muscle mass is really what's important for optimizing your metabolic flexibility, because the muscles have these transporters embedded in the cell membrane. It's called GLUT4 receptors. So that after you eat, your blood sugar tends to rise and your insulin level rises. Well, guess what sucks that glucose in like a magnet is these receptors on your muscles. So if you have low muscle mass, you're going to have really erratic excursions of glucose, which is harmful metabolically. So it is so crucial to have a significant muscle mass. And unfortunately, running or cardiovascular exercise is more of an anabolic activity. In other words, it's breaking you down. It's not really building you up. Or catabolic activity.
Yeah.
And anabolic activity would be like exercise resistance training, where you're
doing squats.
Yeah, squats, deadlifts, bicep curls.
Yeah. So, what about? I'm sure you're probably familiar with Wim Hof and like his stuff. So, Wim Hof has like these series of breathing, right? So he does these things where, basically, if you were to do a sprint, at the end of the sprint, you would be out of breath, you'd be trying to catch your breath. And he does these exercises where you basically do that without the sprinting. So I would practice. And does that kind of do the same thing by building up your cardiovascular system without having to do the running?
I have not studied his approach in detail, so I can't comment on it knowledgeably. But he personally, he's not a very healthy guy. He has some very unhealthy health habits. But there's no question that what he does is effective. And I've read the stories and books for the people who follow his technique, and unbelievable control over physiology, like being exposed to these infectious toxins that would normally kill people. And I mean, it's very impressive. But I haven't integrated that approach into my basics. And I think it may be useful, but I don't know that it's vitally important, that you have to do these things.
Well, let's talk about health is wealth for a minute. And if we dig into that for a little bit, we want to remain healthy. Now, I'm afraid that we're getting to a system that we might have this self-fulfilling prophecy. I have kids, and I remember when my kids first went into preschool, they got sick all the time. And then not only did they get sick all the time, they would come home and get me and my wife sick. And it would like go to the family, right? It was like this full like circular motion. But after a while, the kids didn't get sick anymore and we didn't get sick anymore, right? So like germs, we get stronger, just like resistance training. Over time, we can also get weaker. And so I'm afraid that we're going into this system where we're using hand sanitizer all the time and we're staying away from people all the time, wearing masks or whatever. And that could actually be the self-fulfilling prophecy where things get weaker and weaker and weaker, and then we get sicker and sicker and sicker. Is that a valid fear that you think could happen?
Yeah, in fact, it's given a name, the Hygiene Hypothesis. So that if you live in a very sterile sanitary environment, that minimizes your exposures to these infectious cells, which in moderate doses are hermetic. That is, life is about hermetic stress. Getting enough of a stress is going to cause a reaction so that your body can get stronger as a result of it, rather than getting a massive stress that just takes you out. So exercise
would be one of those.
Oh, absolutely. It's the classic example of hermetic stress. But you can exercise too much. You can run 2-3 a marathon every day for a week, and that's not going to help your health. They'll dig a ditch that you want to potentially have a able to get out of if you haven't run marathons before.
Sure.
So
that's too much.
Yeah.
What about ice baths and cryotherapy?
Those are useful. That is a powerful strategy. I'm a much bigger fan of sauna therapy.
So
You
heat.
have to be careful with cryo because if you're doing resistance training and you go jump into a cold pool or do a cold pool plunge, you'll abort the production of these inflammatory markers from the exercise, not markers, but reactants. And these inflammation that occurs during the exercise is really critical to improve the result of the benefits of the exercise.
So don't do it right
abort it.
after.
No, you've got to wait. But what you can do right after, and what I do pretty much every day, first of all, let me give you a little hint. One of the ways to optimize the benefits of exercise is to do it fasting. So I think that
okay, that was one of my questions.
Time restricted eating. So to eat within a 6 to 8 hour window, 90% of people eat over 12 hours a day. And there's a fair number of people who eat continuously. They wake up in the middle of the night and eat. And that is a prescription for metabolic disaster. So, if you're eating 12 hours a day, you gradually go down so that you're eating 6 or 8 hours a day. Do it slowly because you're going to have some discomfort if you don't. So, but the first thing in the morning after you're fasting, you can do the exercise and you'll get much more benefit if you do it fasting. And then even after that, you can jump into the sauna. And we could talk a lot about saunas, but I think I finally understood and hacked the best sauna. There is because but there's an interesting thing I learned since actually just a few weeks ago, way since we last spoke, is that you've heard of melatonin before, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
For
so
sleep, mostly, yeah.
Yeah, but most people and most everyone, this is what I'm going to tell you is hardly known by anyone. But the common belief is that melatonin is produced in the pineal gland.
Okay.
And usually it's increased when you're exposed to bright sunlight in the daytime and then pretty significant dark absence of light at night. Well, that only makes 5% of your melatonin. 5%. 5%. Where do you think the other 95% is made?
I don't know.
This is such a mind blower.
Yeah.
It's made in your mitochondria.
Okay. Which is your cells, right?
Mitochondria are little organelles within the cells. These are the powerhouses of the cells.
Right.
They vary, usually a few hundred to some cells could have hundreds of thousands, like the egg cells, or your heart cells or brain cells. And there's this substantia nigra, I think, in the brain that is really high density. But anyway, they produce the energy that your body needs. It's in the form of an energy currency called ATP. And this process of generating the energy is dirty. It generates exhaust or smoke, and in the form of reactive oxygen species that can cause free radicals. So melatonin, as you know, is a very potent, effective antioxidant. And isn't it a beyond brilliant strategy your body has created, is to produce the melatonin precisely where it's needed. But here's what that I didn't know. Okay, so melatonin in the mitochondria is 95% of it, but it only is 95% if you're doing one healthy habit that virtually no one does.
Wow. Well, please tell us what that is.
Okay, it's exposing your skin to sunshine.
Ooh.
Imagine that. Now I know, thankfully you could, because you have made a choice to move yourself and your family to places that has abundant sunshine.
Well, I'm a surfer, so I'm always living in the sun.
Yeah. So you're getting, you don't have to worry about it. You're getting the benefits. So, and let me just take a little side tangent here while I'm talking about that, because you're going to get, that may be more important than getting the vitamin D, because obviously everyone knows when you have your skin exposed to sunshine, you're going to make vitamin D. And believe me, there is no doubt in my mind that is the absolute preferred way to get your vitamin D. Ideally, you should never swallow a vitamin D capsule. That's the ideal. Yeah, you shouldn't swallow vitamin D. You should just get it from the sun. I have lived in Florida for over 10 years, maybe 12 years now, and I have not swallowed a vitamin D capsule since I've lived here. And my vitamin D level is very healthy. So, but that's not even the end of it. We know there's another impact of exposing your skin to sun, is that to make vitamin D work well, you need vitamin A. And vitamin A, you need the active form of vitamin A. And vitamin A becomes activated only when your skin is exposed to sunshine. It forms retinoids. And these because the vitamin A is, the term for that is retinol. And a lot of people are confused. They think vitamin A is in plants. It's not. There's no vitamin A in plants. There's something called beta carotene, which is a precursor to vitamin A, but it is not retinol. So, and you need vitamin A, maybe every bit as important as vitamin D for health, especially immune health. No question. So, but you need the active form. So, one of the most critical, simple things, and it's basically free, is exposing your skin to sunshine.
Now, I think a lot of people have heard this, especially in light of the pandemic for the last 24 months, hearing about vitamin D being one of the main main things that prevented you from getting sick during that pandemic. Having that vitamin D was so crucial. So a lot of people have been hearing about this. I hadn't really heard about it in terms of melatonin. So that would also, I mean, besides helping me sleep, what does melatonin really do for me?
Well, the primary thing is it reduces oxidative stress in the mitochondria.
Okay.
So if you had these free radicals being generated, this exhaust from producing fuel from that your body burns primarily in the form of fats and carbohydrates. You can burn protein for fuel, but it's really unusual. So that melatonin will reduce those oxidative stresses and the secondary damage that occurs from this. So your mitochondria itself, the cell membranes, your DNA can get damaged, stem cells, these are all susceptible to oxidative stress. So you really want to minimize as much as possible. And that kind of leads into another aspect that I've known about for 30 years.
Okay.
I first learned about this from a guy named Bill Sardi, who interestingly just passed away a few weeks ago. But it was the fact that iron is incredibly toxic. Oh. And almost everyone watching this has too much iron. And our ability to, well, partially because almost any processed food is fortified with iron. But guess what type of iron they put in this? You won't believe it.
I don't know.
They use iron filings.
Wow.
Like, this is really going to be helpful for you. So that is definitely a culprit. Excuse me. But the major problem is that our body doesn't have an excretory pathway for iron. In other words, there's no simple way to get it out of your body. So it just builds up and builds up. And every day you're gaining a milligram. So in a year, that's a third of a gram. You're only supposed to have like 5 grams in your body, but you can wind up being 60, 65, and you have 25 grams. So fortunately, thank God, there's a simple, easy solution. And that's called blood donation.
Yeah, we were going to talk about that. I want to put a pin in the blood donation for a minute, because there were some things that you had said that I still wanted to go back to while we were still kind of on topic. So going back to vitamin D, we get that from the sun exposure. And now you're talking about melatonin from the sun exposure as well. I'd asked the question, I'm not sure if I got the answer, but melatonin, I think about taking melatonin supplements for sleep. So I'm guessing melatonin helps regulate sleep, which of course is the cornerstone for all kinds of things. Is that kind of the main thing? Or you're saying it's also, and then it also helps the mitochondria prevent oxidation. So it helps
oxidative stress,
stress,
excessive oxidative stress. And I think that's the primary component, the element.
So I want to go back. So getting sun exposure seems to be very healthy. Of course, during the pandemic, you were told to stay inside, not get sun. But getting sun exposure is very important. To your point, yes, I'm a surfer. However, I can get pretty tan. I think you can tell. So like it works for me. Some people are a lot whiter and they probably get burned easier. But I've been hearing a lot about, and actually, I think you told me about a year ago, the number one killer is seed oils.
That's right.
And we're gonna get. I want to get to that. But
actually, I changed my position since I told you that.
Okay.
I think the iron is even more important than seed oils, and the combination is a disaster. High iron and high seed oils is just a recipe for disaster.
But specifically back to the vitamin D and the melatonin from the sun, I want to stick to for a second, because I believe that having seed oils in my body and low cholesterol prevents the sun and my skin from getting the vitamin D uptake. And I'm curious if it also blocks the melatonin uptake.
No. Well, let me while I'm thinking about it, I failed to mention one aspect of melatonin in the mitochondria. you can take all the melatonin supplements you want. It ain't going into the mitochondria. It's just not. That's not the way the melatonin is. The melatonin has to produce it independently, and usually through being exposed to red and near infrared radiation. So now, what was your question again?
About seed oils and low cholesterol blocking vitamin D or melatonin uptake.
No, seed oils don't block it. In fact, they do the exact reverse. When you have a high seed oils in your diet and you have high concentration of that in your cell membranes, that radically increases your risk for sunburn.
Right, sunburn, yeah.
And skin cancer.
Okay.
So the sun really, I mean, even though it's the culprit, it's attributed to be the culprit, it's not the real culprit is the high amounts of seed oils in the diet. Okay. We're only supposed to have like 1 to 2% of our total daily calories intake should come from these seed oils. Historically, that's the only thing we've had. And 170 years ago or so, that all changed. And it's been going up. And if you look at these, my next book is coming out soon, probably. Actually, it'll probably be out before Dallas. And it's called the LA diet. LA is linoleic acid. And it's going to go into details. And there's just hundreds of charts and graphs just demonstrating this real graphically. But a lot of people are confused and think that processed sugar is a problem. And yeah, you should have a lot of processed sugar, but it's not the sugar that's causing this devastating epidemic of chronic disease that we have. It's primarily the seed oils. So carbohydrates can be helpful.
I know in the Bitcoin community, once you start changing your time preference on money, your whole life starts to change. And so in the Bitcoin community, people are really into health. There's a lot of people that are doing like carnivore diets, things like that. But seed oils has been this main target. A lot of Bitcoiners are really coming out against seed oils.
I'm so happy to hear that.
I've been hearing from a lot of people who have completely cut out seed oils out of their diet, that they can now go out in the sun without getting sunburned and without.
Oh, so you're getting that feedback.
Yeah, that they don't need the sunblock on their skin anymore. They can go out in the sun for long periods of time without that, and they're not getting sunburned. So that's it's
a miracle. That's kind of surprising because normally it takes a few years for the concentration in cell membranes to drop that low. But that's great. I'm so excited. I didn't know that was the case.
Yeah. So they're really coming out on seed oil. So what about the cholesterol? And does that have something to do with the vitamin D and
it does. There's a derivative of cholesterol molecule called 7-deoxycholesterol that's embedded in your cell membranes. And that's what the UVB light and sunshine hits and converts it to vitamin D. That it then goes through the blood, vitamin D3 specifically, and then it goes through the liver, gets hydroxylated to 125 or 25 hydroxy D, and it goes to the kidneys to get the other hydroxy. So that, and then 125 dihydroxy is the active form of vitamin D. But essentially, that's not the rate limiting step. If anything is going to limit your ability to make vitamin D, it's the melanin in your skin, the reason your skin becomes darker. So if you're deeply pigmented, if you're from, your relatives are from Africa or the Middle East, you're really dark, deeply pigmented, then you're going to have to be in the sun a lot longer to get that enough exposure for UVB to make vitamin D.
Got it. And for the average person, can they just go for a walk on their lunch break and get sun exposure that way? Or do they need to have like their shirt off or their clothes off?
No, it's totally a reflection of the surface area of the skin that's exposed. So you think of it as you're a solar collector, solar panel. So if you had, if you're going to get maximum power from those solar panels, what do you think if you put a shirt on them and long pants and just a little bit of the skin was exposed, it isn't going to work.
So you need to be sunbathing, basically.
Yeah, essentially, yeah. Basically, in minimal clothes as possible. And if you're a woman in sports bra and shorts, and a man just shorts. That's it.
And now I'm guessing if you can't get access to sun, then you said something about red light therapy or something like that.
Well, red light therapy is not going to make vitamin D. It's not.
So there's no replacement for the sun.
The sun is the best. It's the absolute. It's a fundamental, basic requirement for good health, which is why I think many people watching this, they're more long-term oriented, so they can put in their mind and make goals. And if they're living in Chicago or Seattle, that they know this is not the healthiest place, or in Canada, they want to move to a place where they can get regular sun exposure. And there's not that many places in the U.S. Florida certainly qualifies. California to an extent, and probably certain places in Arizona, but You almost
Cool.
have to get out of the US. You gotta go to Central America or, I mean, Hawaii would be fine too, but
Yeah.
actually I think Hawaii is maybe the same latitude, maybe a little further south than Florida.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Now, I want to go back to one other thing, and then I'm going to ask you a couple other some others. But going back to one thing, we had talked about. You'd said that most people should be working out while they're fasting.
Mm-hmm.
I know for myself, I've been doing 6-hour windows, 4 to 6 hour windows now for about
Wow.
7, 8 years now. I've done that.
Wow. Congratulations.
And I'm at a point now where like I pretty much can only work out or go surfing on an empty stomach. If I eat first, if I go surfing or work out, I just feel too full. I just like to be empty. But some people might say, and actually I was asked this question earlier, that they hear that if you work out on an empty stomach, your body will cannibalize the muscles. It'll actually break the muscles down. Is that only if the body isn't adapted to run off of fat, or is that just not true at all?
Well, it'd be very unusual. The only time it's going to start cannibalizing your muscles is if you're in a fasting state for like 3 to 5 days.
Okay.
But if you're metabolically flexible, as you clearly are, then your body can seamlessly transition to burning carbs as your primary fuel to burning fat.
But
So
what if you're
there's
not?
no-
What if you're not flexible? If you're not fat adapted?
Well, that's a good point. I mean, if you exhaust your glucose stores, typically in the glycogen, you could run into problems. So, but it's a totally solvable solution. And I don't know, actually, that's an interesting question. I haven't really studied it that much, but theoretically it could be an issue
Because
the reason why people get symptoms when they're not metabolically flexible, they will get loss of energy and they're hypoglycemic. It's because they've lost the ability to transition to burning fat. And almost everyone out there has more than enough fat than they need. For weeks, they can survive on their fat.
Everyone has it, but is their body adapted to be able to switch over to that?
No. What do you think the percentage is in the country that are metabolically inflexible? How many people?
Inflexible.
Yeah, how many people are unable to do that? What's the percentage?
I would say 80%, 60 to 80%, maybe.
That's you underestimate. It's like 90%.
Wow. Yeah.
90% are able to do it. Now, I think you probably could be 60% in your audience. So,
Right.
and your people that you network with is probably in the 68% range, but the whole population in general is like 90%.
Sure. Well, I was just thinking, I was just trying to think about the obesity rate in the US. But so if we look at that, then the average person, we might hear all the time saying, I need to eat because my blood sugar levels are dropping. If I don't eat, I'm crashing. I need to get some food in me. And all those types of comments to me seem like they're not fat adapted. That's why they're having those crashes every couple hours. Is that true?
100%. Their body's screaming that message. They just don't know how to understand what the message is.
Okay. So I know that we kind of dove into a bunch of different rabbit holes here, and understanding health can be a deep and complex story. There's all these biohackers out there today. I know you're good friends with Dave Asprey, and I do like to follow him. But I did hear him one time, and he said, because he's testing every little single thing to the minute detail, and he said people would ask me, what should I do about this supplement, or should I try this? And he said the first question I ask him is, how much sleep are you getting? Like, do the big stuff before you do the little stuff. So if kind of looking at like a Pareto's principle, like an 80-20 rule, I'm sure there's probably the 20% of things that would give us the 80% of results. So what would be that 20%? What are the, couple things that we could do for our health that would give us the majority of the results without having to try to dive into a biohackers type of situation?
Well, I think sleep is definitely up there. One of the top few things, no question. And it's somewhat difficult to analyze objectively. It's mostly subjective, and how are you going to figure that out? So that's why there's tools, and my favorite is the Aura Ring. That
I used the Aura Ring for a while, and it made me feel bad about my sleep. Every morning I'd look at the app, and I'm like, "Oh, now I feel really tired."
Yeah, well, it might be that a side effect, but if you get motivated and realize, oh gosh, I'm having such bad deep sleep, and was my experience.
That was my problem.
Low deep sleep.
Yeah.
Okay.
Good REM sleep, but horrible deep sleep.
I've got a solution for you. We'll talk offline because I've integrated something new that's sort of cutting edge, and it's a frequency based approach. And I got 3 hours of deep sleep last night.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, you can get objective data that really is based on this. And the older rings, this is like the generation 3 ring that just came out a few months ago. So the generation 2 wasn't as good. This is a much better sensor. So I think you'll be getting better data on it. But anyway, that's one. The other, we talked about sun exposure. I mean, you really do need about an hour of sun a day. I mean, ideally. Now, not every day, because it's never sunny every day of the year.
Yeah.
So, but most of the days, 4, 5, 6 days a week. And so that is way up there. And then avoiding seed oils like the plague. I mean, they cannot be in your diet. You've got to be obsessive about that. Obsessive. I mean, it's got to be really, really high priority. And the older you are, the worse it is, because the more linoleic acid you have embedded in your cell membranes. The average person is eating 80 grams a day. 80 grams. In the 19th century, the late 1800s, we had 5 or 6 grams a day. Now you need some. If you had 0 in your diet, you would die. It's some is healthy, but the moment you start getting above 10, 15 grams a day, your risk for heart disease, cancer, obesity goes through the roof. So
now, sleep is not easy, but people understand that, and there's plenty of resources you can go to find out about sleep and darkening the room, the ideal room temperature. Get a sleep tracker like the Oura Ring, those types of things. The sun is pretty self-explanatory. Go out in the sun. He said about an hour a day. The seed oils is the one that I'm having a problem with. I've read the research. I understand how bad it is. I get it. But like realistically, how do you cut it out of your diet? Because it's in everything. I'm guessing the only option is to cook every single meal yourself at home and eat it.
No, you're right. It's a commitment that you have to make. You have to see. You're a really sharp guy, Mark. I'm very impressed with what you've been able to learn yourself and figure out, and you're really spot on. So I will personally mentor and encourage you to figure this thing out, because there's some simple strategies that I'll recommend. But the ideal is to use an app that's free on the desktop. If you go mobile, you have to pay for it, but it's called Chronometer, Chronometer, chronometer.com. It's somewhat a pain in the butt to enter your food, but you have to enter it and enter it accurately. So you can't, like if you're having you need a kitchen digital electronic scale so you can know to the gram what you're eating. You enter it all into this app and it will tell you to the 10th of a gram how much linoleic acid you're getting. It's omega-6. It just tells you, and there's no charge for it. It's free. So that's great. And then it'll not only tell you how much you're getting, but you right click on the omega-6 and it will rank order the foods that are highest that you're eating. It'll show you, this food is like 90% of your seed oil is coming from this. So, it's the Pareto principle, right? You get rid of the 2 or 3 biggest ones and you're golden.
And what are the 2 or 3 biggest ones?
Well, I'm just saying for you, when you figure it out for anyone doing this, but that's a good question too. The 2 are typically the biggest
salad dressings and things like that.
Well, seed oils themselves, if you have any canola oil or safflower, sunflower oil in your home, you got to close your eyes and think for a while and say, what relative or neighbor do I not like? And give them this gift. Just give it to them, right?
Yeah.
Get it out of it should not be in your house. It should definitely, it is a toxic metabolic poison. It should not be in your house. So those are the obvious ones. But the hidden ones, the stealth ones, are typically in processed foods and in foods that are ostensibly healthy, like chicken. Chicken has a serious amount of linoleic acid. It's not a good food to eat. You're far better off eating beef or bison or lamb. Much lower. And
when I asked this question to the community on Twitter, Safety, he's the author of the Bitcoin Standard.
Yeah, sure.
He said the best way to get rid of seed oils is just be a carnivore. Of course, he is a carnivore himself. But
that's maybe not the best. It's one way, because I think even Paul.
An easy way, maybe.
Yeah, Paul Saldina is a good friend of mine, and actually lives in Costa Rica, and he's kind of maybe one of the most well-known carnivore advocates, and he wrote the book, The Carnivore Code. And even he has kind of revised his approach and his strategy, and he's including carbohydrates like honey and fruit now. So he wasn't doing that initially, but he has now. So I think carbs aren't dangerous, especially healthy carbs like fruit. They're not going to be. There are some potential problems with many plants, vegetables, that could be highly problematic. And if anything, I'm probably more of a carnivore than anything if I could label my diet. So I'm totally resonate with that. But I think you do need some healthy carbohydrates.
So here's I've heard, and I haven't gone strictly carnivore. I'm pretty heavy carnivore. I consider myself high fat, low carb.
Yeah,
That's
perfect.
just that's what I consider myself. I eat a lot of steak, pretty much at every meal if I can. But what I've heard from my carnivore friends is that they get this feeling of uneasiness or antsiness all the time. And that if they eat a little bit of fruit, it calms them down.
Right. Yeah, that's their body telling to them. They just have to listen. There's nothing wrong with fruit, especially in moderation, healthy fruit.
Yeah. Well, you figure 100 years ago, before we had transportation and refrigeration, people would only eat fruit a few times throughout the year, right? Only when it grew. Today, if we grow it all year round and we transport it around to different parts of the world, but most of the world probably didn't have fruits and vegetables. They don't last.
The subtropics,
Well, the subtropics, but not in Canada, right?
No,
not in Northern Europe. Not in Southern California in the desert. We certainly don't have that. All right. Now let's talk about another thing. Let's talk about mental health. So like brain fog. I know for me, the reason
before we do that, let me just finish up on the hidden sources of linoleic acid. Yeah. Probably one of the biggest ones is eating out in a restaurant.
That's what I was. That's the one I don't want to hear. At a restaurant, you can't eat out at all, right?
You 100%. I mean, you want to minimize the use of processed foods for sure, and you got to almost assume almost any food they're using there is processed. And if they cook it, I guarantee you they are using vegetable oil and seed oil. Any sauce they have, any salad dressing is going to be seed oil. Why would they not? It's just so cheap. You think they're going to cook your food in butter? Yeah. Hell no. It's like cost 10 times as much. Yeah. Now they could do it on an individual basis. And I make a real strong argument when I'm going out to a restaurant with someone I typically don't eat because I'm, time restricted eating, but I'll plead with the waiter or the waitress and to say, listen, the server, he's got an allergic or she's got an allergic reaction. And if there's any seed oil, then we're going to have to call 911. I got it on speed dial on my phone. You're going to have an ambulance come here. It's going to be really messy. So I play with them and I convince them to be my advocate because someone's got to go back in the kitchen and watch who's ever cooking to make sure they don't do it because they could acknowledge, the server could acknowledge you, but they're not looking to see what they do.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's a real big deal. If you're having the majority of your food from restaurants, bad news. Bad news. I mean, you can't eat healthy at restaurants, like a steak. What are they going to do? I mean, it's hard. They're not putting seed oils on your steak.
They're going to cook it in butter, most likely. There's a website. I said I put this out on Twitter, and I got a bunch of feedback. And I was pointed to a website, and I can't recall off the top of my head, but it's a website where restaurants can go and say if they cook with lard or butter, and so they're like non-seed oil restaurants. There's a Twitter account. There's a Twitter account called the Seed Oil Disrespecter, I believe it's called. And, they have these resources and there was a couple places around me that do that. And then I was recently, I was in Cancun at All Inclusive and where they make the omelet, they put the oil in the pan first. And I was like, oh, can you put butter in there? And yeah, they put the butter in there instead. So, there's a few things that you can do to accommodate, but I guess, unfortunately, I didn't like to hear that. For the most part, if you're eating out, you're probably getting seed oil. I
mean, unless you tell them and are aggressive about it, they're going to put the seed oil on your omelet.
Yeah. And most people just have no idea how bad that is.
They don't.
Yeah. Now, and I think you said you're coming out with a book on that, right?
Yes.
You want to plug that? What's that called?
Well, the tentative title is the LA Diet.
The LA Diet. That's right. You said that. The LA Diet. Linoleic acid.
The Los Angeles Diet. It was a double take on the diet book not too long ago. South Beach, the South Beach Diet.
Oh, right.
So, but that was this type of community in Florida, but no, this is the LA diet. So people would think it's out Los Angeles, but so it's a double entendre. It's the linoleic acid diet. So it's going to be great. I can get you a copy. We're in the final stages of doing the editing, and it's great. It's going to the publisher.
Great. Now let's talk about mental health. The thing that originally kicked me off the shelf to finally try intermittent fasting was I had heard that it's a way to get brain fog lifted off and have like sharper, clearer thinking. You had mentioned earlier, some of the mental problems that we get as we get older, Alzheimer's, things like that. Mm-hmm. So what are some of the things that people could do to get that sharper, clearer thinking? Maybe they're in their 40s, 50s, 60s, and they're starting to kind of blank out on what they were talking about, things like that. I'm sure there's a lot of stuff that relates back to diet or maybe sleep.
So I would say that, those are the two I'm going to mention is diet and sleep. You really have to have sleep because sleep may be inadequate sleep may be one of the most significant risk factors for Alzheimer's. So
Okay.
you've got to get enough sleep. And for most people, it's about 7 hours a night. And it really depends. It depends on the quality of your sleep. And if you have something like an Aura, it'll tell you how many minutes of the night you're truly sleeping versus how many you're awake and just tossing and turning and you're not sleeping. So, because they give you a score of efficiency, sleep efficiency. So if you're 80% efficient, then literally 1/5 of the time you're in bed, you're not sleeping. So you have to subtract that from your total. So, 7 hours of sleep is what you need about most people.
Maybe I need to get another ring tracker. Maybe I'll have to do that. Like I said,
Yeah, I think, for everything you're doing, I mean, you are in the fine tuning phase.
yeah.
My friend.
So sleep, sun, and seed oils. We get rid of those three things, and that's probably the biggest chunks.
Well, and for the mental health, I wanted the diet is that you want to attain the ability to become metabolically flexible. So only 10% of the population is, and when you're doing that, your brain is actually regain the ability to burn fat in the form of ketones, which is a water soluble fat that easily penetrates the blood-brain barrier and goes into the brain. And it's a substrate, and it makes you much sharper. In fact, anyone who's tried fasting before, after the first day or two, maybe 5 or 7 day fast, you'll notice the mental clarity is through the roof.
Yeah.
Because your body has switched over and you're just burning fat, and it just loves it. It's crazy. So, but you don't have to be fasting. I mean, if you're overweight and you've got a significant amount of weight, that might be a good strategy to do a few 5-day fasts. But normally once you reach someone like you, not necessarily have to do fasting on a regular basis, other than the time restricted eating, which is a form of fasting. It's called intermittent fasting, but really it's just a lifestyle. And, you wouldn't change it. It is interesting for me to note that you notice that you're so healthy that your body is screaming at you when you violate things. Because if you go out and try to work out with food in your stomach or surf, you can't do it, or you can do it, but you're just annoyed because it's not comfortable. Right.
Yeah, it's not comfortable. And I've even got to the point where like if I sit down and if I'm going to eat like some toast or like some rolls or something, like I can just feel it like come right into my head. Like as soon as I'm only like 2 bites in and I can already feel it. And maybe that's a little bit more placebo effect. But
you said rolls. What were the other things?
Oh, like bread, if I eat some sort of bread.
So guess what that's made from?
What?
It's made from grains.
Right.
And you probably don't know, but in 2004, I wrote my first book. That was 17 years ago now. And I've written a book every year since then. And the name of the book was The No Grain Diet, which is a New York Times bestseller. And even back then, I realized that it's not a good idea, but grains and seeds are loaded with seed oils, linoleic acid. Huh. So plus, there's a lot of other constituents of grains that are a problem. And wheat is primarily gluten and gliadin. So a lot of people are sensitive to them, and you really want to avoid it. But the primary reason, from my perspective on health, is that they're high in linoleic acid. So you really want to eliminate grains in most seeds, most nuts. The only nut that I know of that's healthy in moderate amounts would be macadamia nuts, because almost all the other nuts are very high in linoleic acid in all the seeds. Except for flax seeds, which is high in ALA, alpha.
So nuts and beans as well.
Beans are not high in that in linoleic acid. No, just seeds and grains.
Okay. Now, you had said one of the best things that maybe I could do, and now a lot of people can do, would be for health, would be doing regular blood donations.
Yes.
Explain that.
Yeah, and I just don't say that. That's what the evidence shows, and they've done studies on this. People who donate their blood regularly and I've got to find them because it's just shocking when you find out. But they have extraordinarily better health than the average population who don't donate their blood. So
could that be correlation instead of causation? Like people that are generally healthier think about that.
No, you're right, because it is a correlation. Correlation is not causation, but there is something. And I might actually do an article or publish a paper on this, but there's a set of criteria called the Brandon Hill criteria, which uses correlative data. And if it meets, there's like 9 criteria. If it meets all of them, then you can pretty likely assured that it is causal. So there are exceptions to that. And I think this is one of them. And because there's such a strong foundational mechanism, because iron, I think, is even worse than seed oils. And in some ways it's much easier to treat, but like seed oils, every bit is like seed oils. It's even harder to get out of your system. Seed oils, you can get out within 5 to 10 years if you're really, really good. if you're older, it's going to take you maybe 20 years to get the iron.
Wow.
20 years. And that's donating a pint of blood 4 times a year, which is a fair amount of blood donation, which is probably the most you could do. Now the book I'm writing next year.
So the most you can do would be one per quarter. Typically, is that?
Yeah, that's typically. You're not going to be able to do more than that. Yeah. So, and that's getting each pint of blood has about 250 milligrams of iron, which is about what you'd gain more, but close to what you gain in a year. So
did the early doctors have something with the leeches?
Yeah, they did 100%. I knew that for a long time. My dad had a disease called hemochromatosis, and primarily because he had a genetic hemolytic anemia called thalassemia, which he gave to me. And as a result of that, he had really, really high levels of iron, and it damaged his cells in his pancreas. He actually developed type 1 diabetes it's called bronze diabetes. And fortunately, I figured this out because I was studying, and he was able to get blood donations and got it down pretty low, but he was able to live to be 89. He probably would have passed in the 70s, early 70s, I would think. But so that was good, but I've known about it for a long time. This is the point of the story, but I've kind of put it in the back seat. And I didn't realize until recently, connected with this researcher named Morley Robbins, who helped me understand that it's a storage issue, that even though it doesn't show up high in your blood, it gets stored in your tissues, and you're accumulating a milligram a day. That's the normal accumulation. And it takes a long, long time to get it out. Maybe, as I said, 2 decades if you're elderly.
Wow. Kind of like, I guess not kind of like, but maybe mercury is a problem if you eat a lot of fish, right? And that builds up in your body.
Yeah.
But there's a way.
Tony Robbins is a classic example of that.
Yeah, I just got his new book that he just put out. I haven't gotten through it yet, but he talked about that. But there's a way that you can take supplements to kind of get that out of your body.
Well, it's a little more complex than that. Actually, I'm Tony invited me to his house this month or next month. Next month, I'm going to interview him for his book.
Oh, wow.
On that. And I think mercury is not as much of an issue, but there are supplements you can take that detox it out, but you got to be really rigid with it. You have to stop the influx is the first thing. So in Tony's case, it was swordfish and tuna. I think he was eating, which were really high in mercury.
Wow. That's a lot of information. The big 3: sleep more, get sun, and avoid seed oils, which is the hardest one, but probably the one that has the most impact for you. And we're kind of out of time. I wanted to get in
donate your blood
blood on a quarterly basis. So I'm going to have to add that one. My wife has been really good. She got COVID early on in, I think June or July of 2020. And then she became a regular donor to give her platelets after that. And so
platelets won't lower the iron.
No, I'm just saying, but she got on this regular cycle of donating blood. Yeah. I just haven't. So I got to jump in with my wife, and we'll have to give blood together. I'll have to add that one.
Yeah, that'll be good. Now, ideally, and we could talk about this when we catch up together personally. Excuse me. You might want to. You could do it once a quarter, and that's about the most you can do. But ideally, you do like 150 cc's once a month, so it's a lot easier on your system, and it's not this shock to your system every quarter. So, but you have to have access to somebody who can draw your blood. So that's what I do. I don't donate blood. I don't donate blood. I just draw 150 cc's every month. Got it.
All right. Well, good. I wanted to get into some other stuff, non-medical, because you've been labeled one of the top 12 disinformation people. I wanted to talk about some censorship.
Not just one of the top 12, number one.
Oh, number one, even better.
Yeah. It's interesting. The New York Times came after me and CNN, and I don't know, it'll probably be out before I get to Dallas, but they have been literally requesting interviews with my past former employees. They even went so far to connect with one of my friends from medical school. And the last time I saw him was 40 years ago. And they wanted to interview him for this video series they're doing about me.
Wow.
So it's some massive hit piece that's going to come out there. Obviously, they didn't tell me when they're going to launch it, but it'll probably be sometime in the next few months.
One of my other friends, Alex Epstein, he's coming out with a new book this week on energy. He's the case for fossil fuels. And the Washington Post, the WAPO, is writing a hit piece on him. It's supposed to be out tomorrow from the time of this recording. And similar to you, right? They can't refute any of the data he's put forth, so they'll just attack the character, right?
Yeah, ad hominem attacks, right?
Yeah. So instead of trying to refute any of the data, they just attack you personally. Seems to be the way it goes. So anyway, I want to talk about that. I want to talk about being uncancelable, how you managed to get by even after being canceled off of everything. But we're going to have to table all that for another time. Dr. Mercola has mentioned many times Dallas. And so if you're not already aware, we're having a marketdisruptorslive.com event. There's a link down below. You can come see him live, which he'll be able to answer a lot more of these questions and get to meet him personally and maybe even get a copy of that book that comes out. So check that out, marketdisruptorslive.com. And if you want more information on health, Dr. Joe Mercola, tell us where do they go for that?
Real simple, Mercola.com, Mercola, even being removed from the search engines, Google, which says 93% of the searches, we still are the most visited natural health site in the world for the last 20 years. So
yeah. And as I say on my videos, almost everything you've learned is wrong. I'm typically talking about money, but it's also true on health as well. So you got to get the right information. Pay attention to Dr. Mercola. And with that, we'll go ahead and sign it off. Thanks so much. All right, that's a wrap. That was a great time talking with Dr. Joe Mercola. Hopefully you benefited from that. Remember, health is wealth. There was 3 things that you should be doing that can have the biggest impact on your health. Get sun, get sleep, and cut out those seed oils. That's the one that I need to work on personally. I'm focusing on it, as you know. Now, as I said before, Dr. Joe Mercola will be speaking live at my upcoming live event, marketdisruptorslive.com. There's a link down below. Hopefully you can come see him, George Gammon, Luke Grauman, Danielle DiMartino Booth, Harry Dent, Robert Breedlove, myself, and so many others. Check it out, marketdisruptorslive.com. Of course, as always, give me a thumbs up on the video if you like it. And if you don't like the video, give me a thumbs down. That's okay. But at least leave me a comment and let me know why. And while you're here, check out some of these other videos that we have up on the screen. That's what I got for you today, all right? To your success, I'm out.